Chapter 17 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. My name appears in print, age 29. It was the third morning after my return that my head would not leave the pillow. Dr. Carruthers came and blistered me from head to foot, and for 3 weeks I saw no one but my attendants and my phantom panther. He never left me. There was one corner of the room in which he stayed most, and sometimes there was not room for his tail to wag, and then he moved forward where I could not see his head. This troubled me, for then I could not hold him with my eyes. At night they were 2 balls of green fire, but they had always been. Only when I was well I could turn my head away. Now I could not move it. I knew most of the time it was a shadow from my brain, but was glad to hear Tom's chain rattle and feel sure it was not his very self. They nursed me carefully, and I lay thinking of the little one sick and in prison. Old Martha came and pled with me. I saw Liza and Maria under the lash for the crime of chastity, and myself the accomplice of their brutal masters. I pictured one of them a member of the M.E. Church, appealing to that church for redress and spurned under the black gag. And I? Why, I had been helping men who voted for it to build a meeting house. What was Peter's denial compared to mine? The case arranged itself in my mind. I had writing materials brought, and there, with my head fast on the pillow, I wrote a hexameter rhyme, half a column long, arraigning by name those black gag preachers, painting the scene and holding them responsible. I signed my initials and sent it to Mr. Fleeson, with a note telling him to give my name if it was inquired for. Our spirit did not come that week, but soon my husband came to my room with a copy of the Pittsburgh Gazette, in which was an editorial and a letter full of pious horror and denunciation of that article, and giving my name as the author, so that we knew Mr. Fleeson had published the name in full. This was my first appearance in print over my own signature, and while I was shocked, my husband was delighted, even though he knew a libel suit was threatened. I soon went to Pittsburgh, saw William Elder and John A. Wills, the only anti-slavery lawyers in the city. They said the article was actionable, for it had brought those men into contempt. Elder added, "They are badly hurt, or they would not cry out so loud." Both tendered their gratuitous services for my defense. In a civil suit, we could prove the truth of the charge, and they could get nothing, for my husband owned no property. Everything belonged to his mother, and my trustees could not be held for my misdeeds. Their action would doubtless be criminal, and I would probably be imprisoned. I went home and wrote a reply to the Gazette, which it refused to publish, but it appeared in the Spirit. I reiterated, urged, and intensified my charges against these false priests, until they were dumb about their injuries and libel suit. But of that original article I never could get a copy. Every one had been sold and resold and read to rags before I knew it was in print. I continued to write for the Spirit, but still there did not seem to be anything I could do for the slave. As soon as I was able to be about the house, I fell into my old round of drudgery, but with hope and pride shut out of it. Once my burden pressed so that I could not sleep, and rose at early dawn, and sat looking over the meadow, seeing nothing but a dense white fog. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and thought how like it was to my own life. When I looked again, oh, the vision of glory which met my sight! The rising sun had sent through an opening in the woods a shaft of light, which centered on a hickory tree that stood alone in the meadow, and was then in the perfection of its golden autumn glory. It dripped with moisture, blazed and shimmered. The high lights were diamond-tipped, and between them the deepest shadow was every tint of orange and yellow, mingled and blended in those inimitable lines of natural foliage. Over it, through it, and around it rolled the white fog in great masses, caressing the earth and hanging from the zenith like the veil of the temple of the Most High. All around lay the dark woods, framing in the vision like serried ranks encompassing a throne, to which great clouds rolled, then lifted and scudded away like couriers coming for orders and hastening to obey them. John's New Jerusalem never was so grand. No square corners and forbidding walls. The gates were not made of several solid pearls, but of millions of pearlets, strung on threads of love, offering no barriers through which my soul might not pass. My Patmos had been visited, and I could dwell in it, work and wait, but I would live in it, not lie in a tomb, and once more I took hold of life. I organized a society at which we read, had refreshments, and danced, yea, broke church rules, and practiced promiscuous dancing, minus promiscuous kissing. Of course, this was wicked. I roamed the woods, brought wild flowers and planted them, set up berry bushes, and collected a large variety of roses and lilies. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Mexican War, age 30 to 32. James G. Birney was the presidential candidate of the Liberty Party in 1844, as he had been in 1840. During the campaign, I wrote under my initials for the spirit of liberty, and exposing the weak part of an argument soon came to be my recognized forte. For using my initials I had two reasons: my dislike and dread of publicity, and the fear of embarrassing the Liberty Party with the sex question. Abolitionists were men of sharp angles. Organizing them was like binding crooked sticks in a bundle, and one of the questions which divided them was the right of women to take any prominent part in public affairs. In that campaign, the great Whig argument against the election of Polk was that it would bring on a war with Mexico for the extension of slavery, and when the war came, Whigs and Liberty Party men vied with each other in their cry of "Our country, right or wrong," and rushed into the army over every barrier set up by their late arguments. The nation was seized by a military madness, and in the furor the cause of the slave went to the wall, and the spirit of liberty was discontinued. Its predecessor, the Christian Witness, had failed under the successive management of William Burleigh, Dr. Elder, and Reverend Edward Smith, three giants in those days, and there seemed no hope that any anti-slavery paper could be supported in Pittsburgh, while all anti-slavery matter was carefully excluded from both religious and secular press. It was a dark day for the slave, and it was difficult to see hope for a brighter. To me it seemed that all was lost, unless someone were especially called to speak that truth which alone could make the people free, but certainly I could not be the messenger. For years there had run through my head the words, "Open thy mouth for the dumb, and plead the cause of the poor and needy." The streams sang them, the winds shrieked them, and now a trumpet sounded them, but the words could not mean more than talking in private. I would not, could not believe they meant more, for the Bible in which I read them bid me be silent. My husband wanted me to lecture, as did Abby Kelly, but I thought this would surely be wrong. The church had silenced me so effectually that even now all my sense of the great need of words could not induce me to attempt it. But if I could plead the cause through the press, I must write. Even this was dreadful, as I must use my own name, for my articles would certainly be libelous. If I wrote at all, I must throw myself headlong into the great political maelstrom, and would of course be swallowed up like a fishing boat in the great Norway horror which decorated our school geographies, for no woman had ever done such a thing, and I could never again hold up my head under the burden of shame and disgrace which would be heaped upon me. But what matter? I had no children to dishonor. All save one who had ever loved me were dead, and she no longer needed me, and if the Lord wanted someone to throw into that gulf, no one could be better spared than I. The Pittsburgh Commercial Journal was the leading Whig paper of western Pennsylvania, Robert M. Riddle, its editor and proprietor. His mother was a member of our church, and I thought somewhere in his veins must stir anti-slavery blood. So I wrote a letter to the Journal, which appeared with an editorial disclaimer, "But the fair writer should have a hearing." This letter was followed by another, and they continued to appear once or twice a week during several months. I do not now remember whom I attacked first, but from first to last my articles were as direct and personal as Nathan's reproof to David. Of slavery in the abstract I knew nothing. There was no abstraction to tying Martha to a whipping post and scourging her for mourning the loss of her children. The old Kentucky saint who bore the torture of lash and brine all that bright Sabbath day, rather than curse Jesus, knew nothing of the abstraction of slavery, or the fine-spun theories of politeness, which covered the most revolting crimes with pretty words. This great nation was engaged in the pusillanimous work of beating poor little Mexico, a giant whipping a cripple. Every man who went to the war or induced others to go, I held as the principal in the whole list of crimes of which slavery was the synonym. Each one seemed to stand before me, his innermost soul laid bare, and his idiosyncrasy I was sure to strike with sarcasm, ridicule, solemn denunciations, old truths from Bible and history, and the opinions of good men. I had a reckless abandon, for had I not thrown myself into the breach to die there, and would I not sell my life at its full value? My style I caught from my crude rural surroundings, and was familiar to the unlearned, and I was not surprised to find the letters eagerly read. The Journal announced them the day before publication, the newsboys cried them, and papers called attention to them, some by daring to endorse, but more by abusing Mr. Riddle for publishing such unpatriotic and incendiary rant. In quoting the strong points, a venal press was constrained to scatter the living coals of truth. The name was held to be a nom de plume, for in print it looked so unlike the common pronunciation of that of one of the oldest families in the county that it was not recognized. Moreover, it must be a disguise adopted by some man. "Wiseacres," said one of the county judges. No western Pennsylvania woman had ever broken out of women's sphere. All lived in the very center of that sacred enclosure, making fires by which husbands, brothers, and sons sat reading the news, each one knowing that she had a soul, because the preacher who made his bread and butter by saving it had been careful to inform her of its existence, as preliminary to her knowledge of the indispensable nature of his services. But the men whom I ridiculed and attacked knew the hand which held the mirror up to nature, and also knew they had a legal remedy, and that to their fines and imprisonment I was as indifferent as to their opinions. One of these, Honorable Gabriel Adams, had taken me by the hand at my father's funeral, led me to a stranger, and introduced me as the child I told you of, but 8 years old, her father's nurse and comforter. He had smoothed my hair and told me not to cry. God would bless me for being a good child. He was a member of the session when I joined church. His voice and prayer had soothed mother's hard journey through the dark valley, and now, as mayor of the city, had ordered its illumination in honor of the Battle of Buena Vista, and this, too, on Saturday evening when the unholy glorification extended into the Sabbath. Measured by the standards of his profession as an elder in the church, whose highest judicatory had pronounced slavery and Christianity incompatible, no one was more vulnerable than he, and of none was I so unsparing. Yet, as I wrote, the letter was blistered with tears, but his oft-repeated comment was, "Jane is right," and he went out of his way to take my hand and say, "You were right." Samuel Black, a son of my pastor, dropped his place as leader of the Pittsburgh bar and rushed to the war. My comments were thought severe even for me, yet the first intimation I had that I had not been cast aside as a monster came from his sister, who sent me a message that her father, her husband, and herself approved my criticism. Samuel returned with a colonel's commission, and one day I was about to pass him without recognition, where he stood on the pavement talking to 2 other lawyers, when he stepped before me and held out his hand. I drew back, and he said, "Is it possible you will not take my hand?" I looked at it, then into his manly, handsome face, and answered, "There's blood on it. The blood of women and children slain at their own altars, on their own hearthstones, that you might spread the glorious American institution of women whipping and baby stealing." "Oh," he exclaimed, "this is too bad. I swear to you I never killed a woman or a child." "Then you did not fight in Mexico, did not help to bombard Buena Vista." His friends joined him and insisted that I did the colonel great wrong, when he looked squarely into my face and, holding out his hand, said, "For sake of the old church, for sake of the old man, for sake of the old times, give me your hand." I laid it in his and hurried away, unable to speak, for he was the most eloquent man in Pennsylvania. He fell at last at the head of his regiment while fighting in the Battle of Fair Oaks for that freedom he had betrayed in Mexico. When Kossuth was on his starring tour in this country, he used to create wild enthusiasm by "Your own late glorious struggle with Mexico," but when he reached that climax in his Pittsburgh speech, a dead silence fell upon the vast, cheering audience. The social ostracism I had expected when I stepped into the political arena proved to be Bunyan lions. Instead of shame, there came such a crop of glory that I thought of pulling down my barns and building greater, that I might have where to store my new goods. Among the press notices copied by the Journal was this: "The Pittsburgh Commercial Journal has a new contributor who signs her name Jane G. Swisshelm, dips her pen in liquid gold, and sands her paper with the down from butterflies' wings." This troubled me, because it seemed as though I had been working for praise. Still, the pretty compliment gratified me. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Training School. Paul fought with beasts at Ephesus as a part of his training for that good fight with principalities and powers and iniquity in high places, and I think that Tom and the bears helped to prepare me for a long conflict with the southern tiger. I had early come to think that Tom would kill some of the children who trooped to see him, and that I should be responsible, as I alone saw the danger. This danger I sought to avert, but how to dispose of the beautiful creature I could not conjecture. There was usually a loaded gun in the house, but I was almost as much afraid of it as of Tom. All our neighbors were delighted with him and loathed to have him killed. I had once tried to poison a cat, but failed, and I would not torture Tom. I wanted Dr. Palmer to give me a dose for him, but he declined. I tried in vain to get someone to shoot him. Then I thought of striking the great beast on the head with a hatchet while he had hold of some domestic animal. The plan seemed feasible, but I kept my own counsel and my hatchet and practiced with it until I could hit a mark and thought I could bury the sharp blade into Tom's skull. One day all the men were in the meadow making hay, and I alone getting dinner. John McKelvey came with his great dog Watch. He went up into the meadow, and Watch stayed in the kitchen. I started to go to the garden for parsley, and found Tom crouched to spring on a cow. He made the leap, came short of the cow, which ran away bellowing with terror, and Tom had but touched the ground when Watch sprang upon him. It was a sight for an amphitheater. The two great creatures rolled in a struggle which I knew must be fatal to Watch, but thought he could engage Tom's attention until I got my hatchet. I ran back for it, took the dinner horn, and blew a blast that would bring one man, and I did not want 1,000. Then I ran back to the scene of conflict, horn in one hand, hatchet in the other, and lo, no conflict was there, no Tom, no dog, nothing but the torn and bloody ground. Horror of horrors! There was a broken chain. Tom loose! Tom free! Now someone would be murdered. I turned to look, and there on a log, not a rod from me, he stood with head erect and tail drooping, his white throat, jaws, and broken chain dripping with blood, and with my first thankfulness that he had not escaped, came admiration for the splendid sight. The bold, sweeping curves and graceful motion as he turned his head to listen. Then I learned panthers went by sound, not scent. I blew another blast on the horn and went toward him, for I must not lose sight of him. If he attacked me, could I defend myself with the hatchet? When they found me, I would be horrible to look upon, and it would kill Elizabeth. Will my peas burn? The flies will get into that pitcher of cream. If I am killed, they will forget to put parsley in the soup. Tom changed his weight from one foreclaw to the other, and gnashed his teeth. Here the king and I are standing face to face together. King Tom, how is your majesty? It's mighty pleasant weather. So ran my thoughts in the intense strain of that waiting. It must be full 10 minutes before Tom's master could get to the house after that first blast, and if he did not hear that, must be too late. But Tom kept his place, and my husband rushed by me, carrying the pitchfork with which he had been at work, and I saw no more until Tom was in his cage. Watch had dragged himself to his master's feet to die, and I went into the house and finished getting dinner, more than ever afraid of Tom, and more than ever at a loss to know how to get rid of him. Yet he still lived and rattled his chain by the garden path, but it was a year before our next adventure. One summer morning at sunrise I was shocked out of sleep by shrieks and shouts and scurrying feet. I sprang out of bed and rushed into the hall in time to see Tom dash out of it into the dining room, mother-in-law and the girl disappearing upstairs, and the 2 hired men through the barn door. My husband soon followed Tom, who had taken refuge under a large, heavy, falling-leaf table, and seemed inclined to stay there. This time his collar was broken, and feeling the advantage, he paid no heed to the hand or voice of his quondam master. He would not move, but growled defiance, and the table protected him from a blow under the ear, so his late master became utterly nonplussed. If the cage were there, the great beast would probably go into it, but how get it there? The wealth of India would not have induced one of those men to come out of that barn, or one of those women to come down those stairs. Something must be done, and I proposed to hold Tom while my husband brought the cage. He hesitated. I was not in good fighting trim, for my hair, which was long and heavy, had fallen loose, but preparation could avail nothing. The only hope lay in perfect coolness and a steady gaze. I knelt and took hold of Tom by the back of the neck, talked to him, and thought that cage was long in coming. He shifted his weight and seemed about to get up. This meant escape, and I held him hard, commanding him to "Lie down, sir." He blinked at me, seemed quite indifferent, and altogether comfortable. By and by the man who had ceased to be master returned without the cage, utterly demoralized, and was here without a weapon, without a plan. I resigned my place and told him I would bring a rope. This I intended to do, and also my hatchet. I had but gotten halfway to the front door when there was a scuffle, the loud voice of my husband, shrieks upstairs, rattling of furniture, and crashing of glass, and when I got back to the room, I saw the tip of Tom's tail disappearing. He had gone through the window and taken the sash with him. He ran into his cage, and that was his last taste of liberty. But he lived a year after, chained in a corn crib. Every evening in the gloaming he would pace back and forth, raise his kingly head, utter his piercing shriek, then stop and hark for a response, walk again, shriek and listen, while the bears would bellow an answer. The bears, too, were often exciting and interesting. Once I rescued a toddling child when running toward Big Bear, and not more than 2 feet from where he stood waiting with hungry eyes. At another time they both broke loose, on a bitter cold day when I was alone in the house. I defended myself with fire, meeting them at every door and window with a hickory brand. I wondered, as they went round and round the house, if they would stop in the chimney corner and make the acquaintance of Tom, but they took no notice of him, and after they had eaten several buckets of porridge, they concluded there was nothing in the house they wanted, so became good-natured and went and climbed a tree. Such schoolmasters must have imparted a flavor of savagery to my Mexican War letters, which attracted readers as Tom did visitors. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Rights of Married Women. After Mother's death, I prosecuted to a successful issue a suit for the recovery of the house in which I was born. It stood on Water Street near Market, and our lawyer, Walter Lowry, afterwards Supreme Judge, was to have given us possession of the property on the 1st of July, 1845, which would add $800 a year to the income of my sister and myself. But on the 10th of April, the great fire swept away the building and left the lot bearing ground rent. Property rose, and we had a good offer for the lease. Everyone was willing to sell, but the purchasers concluded that both our husbands must sign the deed. To this no objection was made, and we met in William Shinn's office, when my husband refused to sign unless my share of the purchase money were paid to him. Mother's will was sacred to me. The money he proposed to put in improvements on the Swissvale mills. These, in case of his death before his mother, would go to his brothers. I had not even a dower right in the estate, and already the proceeds of my labor and income from my separate estate were put upon it. I refused to give him the money, and on my way alone from the lawyer's office it occurred to me that all the advances made by humanity had been through the pressure of injustice, and that the screws had been turned on me, that I might do something to right the great wrong which forbade a married woman to own property. So instead of spending my strength quarreling with the hand, I would strike for the heart of that great tyranny. I borrowed books from Judge Wilkins, took legal advice from Colonel Black, studied the laws under which I lived, and began a series of letters in the Journal on the subject of a married woman's right to hold property. I said nothing of my own affairs, and confined myself to general principles, until a man in East Liberty furnished me an illustration, and with it I made the cheeks of men burn with anger and shame. The case was that of a young German merchant who married the daughter of a wealthy farmer. Her father gave her a handsome outfit in clothes and furniture. She became ill soon after marriage, and her sister took her place as housekeeper and nursed her till she died, after bequeathing the clothes and furniture to the sister. But the sorrowing husband held fast to the property and proposed to turn it into money. The father wanted it as souvenir of his lost child, and tried to purchase of him, but the husband raised the price until purchase was impossible, when he advertised the goods for sale at vendue. The father was an old citizen, highly respected, and so great contempt and indignation was felt that at the vendue no one would bid against him, so the husband's father came forward and ran up the price of the articles. When her riding dress, hat, and whip were held up, there was a general cry of shame. The incident came just in time for my purpose, so I turned every man's scorn against himself, said to them, "Gentlemen, these are your laws. Your English ancestors made them. Your fathers brought them across the water and planted them here, where they flourish like a green bay tree. You robbed that wife of her right to devise her own property. That husband is simply your agent." Lucretia Mott and Mary A. Grew of Philadelphia labored assiduously for the same object, and in the session of 47 and 48, the legislature of Pennsylvania secured to married women the right to hold property. Soon after the passage of the bill, William A. Stokes said to me, "We hold you responsible for that law, and I tell you now You will live to rue the day when you opened such a Pandora's box in your native state and cast such an apple of discord into every family in it." His standing as a lawyer entitled his opinion to respect, and as he went on to explain the impossibility of reconciling that statute with the general tenor of law and precedent, I was gravely apprehensive. The public mind was not prepared for so great a change. There had been no general demand for it. Lawyers did not know what to do with it, and judges shook their heads. Indeed, there was so much doubt and opposition that I feared a repeal, until some months after Colonel Kane came to me and said, "There is a young lawyer from Steubenville named Stanton who would like to be introduced to you." I was in a gracious mood and consented to receive the young lawyer named Stanton. As he came into the room and advanced toward me, immediately I felt myself in the presence of a master mind, of a soul born to command. When introduced, he gravely took my hand and said, "I call to congratulate you upon the passage of your bill. It is a change I have long desired to see." We sat and talked on the subject some time, and my fears vanished into thin air. If this man had taken that law into favor, it would surely stand, and, as he predicted, be improved and enlarged. I have never been so forcibly impressed by any stranger. His compactness of body and soul, the clear outlines of face and figure, the terseness of his sentences, and firmness yet tenderness of his voice were most striking, and as he passed down the long room after taking leave, my thought was, "Mr. Stanton, you have started for some definite point in life, some high goal, and you will reach it." This was prophetic, for he walked into the War Department of this nation at a time when it was probable no other man in it could have done the work there which freedom demanded in her hour of peril, for this young man was none other than Edwin M. Stanton, the Ajax of the Great Rebellion. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. The Pittsburgh Saturday Visitor. After the war, the abolitionists began to gather their scattered forces and wanted a Liberty Party organ. To meet this want, Charles P. Shiras started the Albatross in the fall of '47. He was the Iron City poet, author of Dimes and Dollars and Oh No Man a Dollar. He was of an old and influential family, had considerable private fortune, was courted and flattered, but laid himself and gifts on the altar of liberty. His paper was devoted to the cause of the slave and of the free laborer, and started with bright prospects. He and Mr. Fleeson urged me to become a regular contributor, but Mr. Riddle objected, and the journal had 500 readers for every one the Albatross could hope. In the one I reached the 99 unconverted, while in the other I must talk principally to those who were rooted and grounded in the faith. So I continued my connection with the journal until I met James McMasters, a prominent abolitionist, who said sorrowfully, "Well, the last number of the Albatross will be issued on Thursday." Is it possible? Possible and true. That is the end of its first quarter, and Shiras gives it up. In fact, we all do. No use trying to support an abolition paper here. While he spoke, a thought struck me like a lightning flash, and he had but finished speaking when I replied, "I have a great notion to start a paper myself." He was surprised, but caught at the idea and said, "I wish you would. You can make it go if anybody can, and we'll do all we can to help you." I did not wait to reply, but hurried after my husband, who had passed on, soon overtook and told him the fate of the Albatross. For this he was sorry, for he always voted a straight abolition ticket. I repeated to him what I had said to Mr. McMasters, when he said, "Nonsense," then reflected a little and added, "Well, I do not know after all, but it would be a good idea. Riddle makes lots of money out of your letters." When we had talked about 5 minutes, he turned to attend to business, and I went to the Journal office, found Mr. Riddle in his sanctum, and told him the Albatross was dead, the Liberty Party without an organ, and that I was going to start the Pittsburgh Saturday Visitor. The first copy must be issued Saturday week, so that abolitionists would not have time to be discouraged, and that I wanted him to print my paper. He had pushed his chair back from his desk and sat regarding me in utter amazement while I stated the case, then said, "What do you mean? Are you insane? What does your husband say?" I said my husband approved. The matter was all arranged. I would use my own estate, and if I lost it, it was nobody's affair. He begged me to take time to think, to send my husband to him, to consult my friends. Told me my project was ruinous, that I would lose every dollar I put into it, and begged, entreated me to take time, but all to no purpose, when a bright idea came to him. "You would have to furnish a desk for yourself. You see, there is but one in this room, and there was no other place for you. You could not conduct a paper and stay at home, but you must spend a good deal of time here." Then I suddenly saw the appalling prospect thus politely presented. I had never heard of any woman, save Mary Kingston, working in an office. Her father, a prominent lawyer, had employed her as his clerk when his office was in their dwellings, and the situation was remarkable and very painful. And here was I, looking not more than 20, proposing to come into the office of the handsome stranger who sat bending over his desk, that he might not see me blush for the unwomanly intent. Mr. Riddle was esteemed one of the most elegant and polished gentlemen in the city, with fine physique and fascinating manners. He was a man of the world, and his prominence had caused his name to become the target of many an evil report in the bitter personal conflicts of political life. I looked the facts squarely in the face and thought, I have been publicly asserting the right of women to earn a living as bookkeepers, clerks, saleswomen, and now shall I shrink for fear of a danger anyone must meet in doing as I advised? This is my Red Sea. It can be no more terrible than the one which confronted Israel. Duty lies on the other side, and I am going over. Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. The crimson waves of scandal, the white foam of gossip shall part before me and heap themselves up as walls on either hand. So rapidly did this reflection pass through my mind, or so absorbed was I with it, that there had been no awkward pause when I replied, "I will get a desk. Shall be sorry to be in your way, but there is plenty of room, and I can be quiet." He seemed greatly relieved, and said cheerfully, "Oh, yes, there is plenty of room. I can have my desk moved forward and take down the shutters, when there will be plenty of light. Heretofore you have been Jove thundering from a cloud, but if you will come down to dwell with mortals, we must make a place for you." Taking down the shutters meant exposing the whole interior of the room to view from a very public street, and after he had exhausted every plea for time to get ready, he engaged to have the first copy of the Visitor printed on the day I had set. He objected to my way of spelling the word, but finding I had Johnson for authority, would arrange the heading to suit. I was in a state of exaltation all forenoon, and when I met my husband at dinner, the reaction had set in, and I proposed to countermand the order, when he said emphatically, "You will do no such thing. The campaign is coming. You have said you will start a paper, and now if you do not, I will." The coming advent was announced, but I had no arrangements for securing either advertisements or subscribers. Josiah King, now proprietor of the Pittsburgh Gazette, and James H. McClelland called at the Journal office and subscribed, and with these two supporters the Pittsburgh Saturday Visitor entered life. The mechanical difficulty of getting out the first number proved to be so great that the forms were not on the press at 3 p.m. By 5 the streets were so blocked by a waiting crowd that vehicles went around by other ways, and it was 6 o'clock, January 20th, 1848, when the first copy was sold at the counter. I was in the editorial room all afternoon correcting proof to the last moment, and when there was nothing more I could do, was detained by the crowd around the doors until it was after 11. Editors and reporters were gathered in the sanctum, and Mr. Riddle stood by his desk, pointing out errors to someone who should have prevented them, when I had my wraps on ready to start. Mr. Fleeson, then a clerk on the Journal, stepped out, hat in hand, and bowing to the proprietor, said, "Mr. Riddle, it is your privilege to see Mrs. Swisshelm to her lodgings, but as you seem to decline, I hope you will commission me." Mr. Fleeson was a small man, and Mr. Riddle had drawn himself to his full height, and stood looking down at him, saying, "I want it distinctly understood that Mrs. Swisshelm's relations in this office are purely those of business. If she requires anything of any man in it, she will command him, and her orders shall be obeyed. She has not ordered my attendance, but has kept her servant here all the evening to see her to her friend's house, and this should be sufficient notice to any gentleman that she does not want him." During the 10 years we used the same editorial room. Mr. Riddle was often absent on the days I must be there, and always secured plenty of light by setting away the shutters when I entered. He generally made it necessary for me to go to his house and settle accounts, and never found it convenient to offer his escort to any place unless accompanied by his wife. The visitor was 3 years old when he turned one day, examined me critically, and exclaimed, "Why do you wear those hideous caps? You seem to have good hair. Mrs. Riddle says she knows you have, and she and some ladies were wondering only yesterday why you do make yourself such a fright." The offending cap was a net scarf tied under the chin, and I said, "You know I am subject to quinsy, and this cap protects my tonsils." He turned away with a sigh, and did not suspect that my tonsils had no such protection outside the office, where I must meet a great many gentlemen and make it apparent that what I wanted of them was votes, votes, votes for the women sold on the auction block, scourged for chastity, and robbed of their children, and that admiration was no part of my object. Any attempt to aid business by any feminine attraction was to my mind revolting in the extreme, and certain to bring final defeat. In nothing has the Church of Rome shown more wisdom than in the costume of her female missionaries. When a woman starts out in the world on a mission, secular or religious, she should leave her feminine charms at home. Had I made capital of my prettiness, I should have closed the doors of public employment to women for many a year, by the very means which now makes them weak, underpaid competitors in the great workshop of the world. One day Mr. Riddle said, "I wish you had been here yesterday. Robert Watson called. He wanted to congratulate us on the relations we have for so long maintained. We have never spoken of it, but you must have known the risk of coming here. He has seen it, says he has watched you closely, and you are an exception to all known law, or the harbinger of a new era in human progress." Robert Watson was a retired lawyer of large wealth, who watched the world from his study and philosophized about its doings, and when Mr. Riddle had given me this conclusion, the subject was never again referred to in our years of bargaining, buying and selling, paying and receiving. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Half a Century by Jane Grey Swisshelm. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Pamela Nagami. Reception of the Visitor. While preparing matter for the first number of the Visitor, I had time to think that so far as any organization was concerned, I stood alone. I could not work with Garrison on the ground that the Constitution was pro-slavery, for I had abandoned that in 1832, when our church split on it, and I went with the New School, who held that it was then anti-slavery. The Covenanters, before it was adopted, denounced it as a covenant with death and an agreement with hell. I had long ago become familiar with the arguments on that side, and I concluded that they were fallacious and could not go back to them, even for a welcome into the abolition ranks. The political action wing of the anti-slavery party had given formal notice that no woman need apply for a place among them. True, there was a large minority who dissented from this action, but there was division enough without my furnishing a cause for contention. So I took pains to make it understood that I belonged to no party. I was fighting slavery on the frontier plan of Indian warfare, where every man is captain, lieutenants, all the corporals and privates of his company. I was like the Israelites in the days when there was no king, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. It seemed good unto me to support James G. Birney for president, and to promulgate the principles of the platform on which he stood in the last election. This I would do, and no man had the right or power to stop me. My paper was a 6-column weekly with a small Roman letterhead. My motto, "Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward," the names of my candidates at the head of the editorial column, and the platform inserted as standing matter. It was quite an insignificant-looking sheet, but no sooner did the American eagle catch sight of it than he swooned and fell off his perch. Democratic roosters straightened out their necks and ran screaming with terror. Whig coons scampered up trees and barked furiously. The world was falling, and everyone had heard it, saw it, and felt it. It appeared that on some inauspicious morning each one of 3/4 of the secular editors from Maine to Georgia had gone to his office suspecting nothing, when from some corner of his exchange list there sprang upon him such a horror as he had little thought to see. A woman had started a political paper. A woman! Could he believe his eyes? A woman! Instantly he sprang to his feet and clutched his pantaloons, shouted to the assistant editor, when he, too, read and grasped frantically at his cassomeres, called to the reporters and pressmen and typos and devils who all rushed in, heard the news, seized their nether garments, and joined the general chorus, "My breeches, oh my breeches!" Here was a woman resolved to steal their pantaloons, their trousers, and when these were gone they might cry, "Ye have taken away my gauds, and what have I more?" The imminence of the peril called for prompt action, and with one accord they shouted, "On to the breach, in defense of our breeches! Repel the invader, or fill the trenches with our noble dead!" "That woman shall not have my pantaloons," cried the editor of the big city daily. "Nor my pantaloons," said the editor of the dignified weekly. "Nor my pantaloons," said he who issued manifestos but once a month. "Nor mine, nor mine, nor mine," chimed in the small fry of the country towns. Even the religious press could not get past the tail or shop, and pantaloons was the watchword all along the line. George D. Prentice took up the cry and gave the world a 2/3 column leader on it, stating explicitly, "She is a man all but the pantaloons." I wrote to him asking a copy of the article, but received no answer, when I replied in rhyme to suit his case. "Perhaps you have been busy, horse-whipping Sal or Lizzie, stealing some poor man's baby, selling its mother maybe. You say, and you are witty, that I, and 'tis a pity, of manhood lack but dress. But you lack manliness, a body clean and new, a soul within it too. Nature must change her plan ere you can be a man." This turned the tide of battle. One editor said, "Brother George, beware of Sister Jane." Another, "Prentice has found his match." He made no reply, and it was not long until I thought the pantaloon argument was dropped forever. There was, however, a bright side to the reception of the Visitor. Horace Greeley gave it respectful recognition. So did N.P. Willis and General Morris in the Home Journal. Henry Peterson's Saturday Evening Post, Godey's Ladies' Book, Graham's and Sargent's magazines, and the anti-slavery papers, one and all, gave it pleasant greeting. while there were other editors who did not, in view of this innovation, forget that they were American gentlemen. There were some saucy notices from John Smith, editor of the Great West, a large literary sheet published in Cincinnati. After John and I had pelted each other with paragraphs, a private letter told me that she who had then won a large reputation as John Smith was Celia, who afterwards became my very dear friend until the end of her lovely life, and who died the widow of another dear friend, William H. Burleigh. In the second number of the Visitor, James H. McClelland, as Secretary of the County Convention, published its report and contributed an able article, thus recognizing it as the much-needed county organ of the Liberty party. End of chapter 22.